Kintsugi Heroes brings you the following River Murray flood recovery story, jointly funded by the Commonwealth and South Australian governments under the Disaster Recovery Funding Arrangements. To find out more about this podcast, head to kintsugiheroes.com.au. The 2022 River Murray floods in South Australia were caused by record water inflows from the Murray-Darling Basin due to heavy upstream rainfall. The slowly rising floodwaters inundated homes, businesses and farmland, causing widespread displacement, infrastructure damage and agricultural losses. The disaster significantly impacted local economies, communities and led to the region's long-term recovery. In this special limited series of Kintsugi Heroes, John Millam sits down with members of the Riverlands community and gives them space to share their experiences of their personal adversity and community resilience. It's only through connection and empathy that there can be a path to recovery. In this episode, John Millam is joined by Simone Bailey, the Mayor of Mid-Murray Council. She speaks about her pivotal role during the 2022 floods in the Riverland region of South Australia. Simone stepped into office just as a flood emergency was declared and quickly adapted from her initial financial and strategic focus to tackling the crisis at hand. She worked tirelessly to support her community, coordinating with local councils and advocating for government resources. Simone navigated challenges from levee construction and insurance issues to maintaining essential services during prolonged floods. Her journey highlights the importance of community resilience and effective leadership in the face of natural disasters.
So, ladies and gentlemen and listeners, Kintsugi Heroes, again, welcome. And today we have someone who was up to her armpits in the flood, so to speak, right? It's the mayor of, so it's Mid-Murray Council, Simone, and you live in Mannum, which is one of the towns that were heavily impacted. So, Simone Bailey, welcome to Kintsugi Heroes Beyond the Deluge.
Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. And of course, as a so you're a mayor, right? That tends to be, maybe we're doing a little bit of politicking here, but this is very germane to your world, right? This is your town, your places. You were having to deal with issues. But what's interesting is you were a new mayor when this popped up. We might go back. How did you get to become mayor of a beautiful little town like Mannum on the banks of the Murray River? What's the Simone Bailey journey?
I came from the city, so lived in Adelaide for all of my life up till mid-20s, and we came to visit Mannum one day and we loved it. We saw the prices. We sold our house in the city and we moved up. It has been the best place to live. I am the kind of person that changes my job every 5 or so years. I get a little bit bored. So about 8 or 9 years ago, I applied for a job at council as the accountant, and I saw how they were spending my money and I wasn't really happy. So I decided to put my hand up as an elected member instead of being accountant. I did that for 4 years and I still wasn't getting as much change as what I liked. So I thought I had this great idea of going for mayor. And I won the election in early November, and I actually got sworn in the day after the flood emergency was declared. We hadn't had rain for many, many years, really good rain. So when people were talking about floods in about August, none of us really believed there was water coming. So I was literally thrown in the deep end.
So, which is a great metaphor. So, interesting. Are you talk about, applying as an accountant, but then becoming a councillor. Are you an activist? Is that your, natural place?
No, not really an activist. And when you talk about politics, I actually hate politics, And so when people say that I'm a politician because I'm a mayor, I disagree. I'm a community person and I'm trying to do the best for my community. I saw a council that I didn't believe that they understood, finances. I could see in our long-term financial plan that rates were going up 6.5% every single year for the next 10 years. And I was concerned that, if the spending didn't stop, that it would go up a lot further than what they were predicting. Now, you've been to our beautiful town of Mannum, but that's just only part of the Mid-Murray Council area. So we go all the way up to Morgan. So the river in South Australia is 640 kilometres long, and we actually have 220 kilometres of it. So we're about a third of the river in South Australia. So not only did it hit Mannum, but it hit another 16 of our towns and 52 of our shack areas. So, yeah, we were well and truly inundated over that flood period.
And, of course, Mannum is a little, a beautiful little urban centre, right? But there's places that are larger and smaller in your area, right? So quite a diverse group of needs that you were facing, responding to for the flood.
Yep, it certainly is.
Yeah. What is your Mid-Murray like? How do you see it, right? Because you're actually, like, there are so many people in that area who actually have been there for generations, right? So you've come in. How do you see it?
Look, it's a great community. Whatever town you belong to in Mid-Murray, you really feel like you've got the community behind you. And if you're not part of a town, you might be part of a farming community. And, everyone's got everyone's back, and that's what we loved about it. And the first visit that we did to Mannum, we went into the food land in the main street, and everyone was saying hello to us, and we felt so welcome that we just wanted to move up there.
Wow. It's a huge move. How did you decide to pack up? What was it's quite a courageous move to the tree change, right? Especially if you've been in the city all your life.
Yeah, look, we were a young family at the time. We both didn't love our jobs, but we were in decent jobs. We could own a house in Mannum. We could build a brand new house and not have a mortgage. So that was a big sell for us. And because I'd had my first child and we were hoping for more, it was a smart move, because then I wouldn't have had to have gone back to work. So,
yeah. When you ran for council, what was that like? Did you become completely enamored of the serving the community process?
Yeah, look, I've done that all of my life. My life has been service. My mum and dad taught me that from a young age, and I'm hoping to teach my kids the same. So all I did was just went out to each community and, hope that they got to know me and got to know that, my heart is with them, and I will fight for whatever is right in each community as much as I could. And yeah, the current mayor had been in for a long time, so I think the community was looking for a change, and yeah, I was lucky that they trusted me.
What was your platform?
The platform was that we had a potentially unsustainable council, and I was very concerned about our finances, and I'm an accountant, so I had the background. And yeah, in February, after it, so it was 3 months after I'd been put my hand up and been sworn in, we actually did get an unsustainable rating from the Essential Services Commission of South Australia. So at least what I was talking about was proven right, sadly.
Yeah. Well, and of course, as you said, you've taken the robe of office. The jewelry is wrapped around your neck. Although you were telling me there's not much jewelry involved.
Just hope jewelry to me.
Bit of costume jewelry, and then you thought you'd be worried about strategic plans and finances. But you will, immediately had to make some massive decisions. Tell me about what was on your plate the first week you were in office.
Yeah, look, the CEO called me after the votes were counted, and he said, "Oh, Simone, I have to tell you something. We've actually been looking at building some levees in, the main street, and one in Morgan and one in Mannum Reserve, and you might want to learn about these quick, smart." And, within a few days, we had media crews coming up to talk about these levies. Staff were just amazing. We have a very, small base of staff for such a huge area, 6,000 kilometres with about 92 staff. So, anything that I could do to help. So in one case, we were trying to call community meetings to talk about these levees that we were going to build in the main street of Mannum. So put my hand up to go and deliver flyers and talk to each business owner in the main street and as many householders as I could to talk about what that meant for them. But, to do to do what we had to do, we were trying to save the rest of the town from having septic, so even though there were lots of houses that were above flood level, had we not built levees, then they wouldn't have had septic for the whole time of the flood.
Yeah. So the levee process, right? It's a challenging one when you look at it, because it actually split the street. So there were places on the riverbank that were going to go under as well. How was it dealing with the conversations around those? You're out, you're in type thing. That must have been tough.
Yep. That was really difficult. And at the time, people still didn't believe the water was coming. So it was really hard to have those conversations. Like, I really need you to come to this community meeting and listen to what we're saying. And then, of course, once that had settled in, it was like, why couldn't you build it behind my shop so that I'm safe and things like that. But, we'd done all the research and we just couldn't build it in any other place. The levees had been built in 1970s. So, we had a reason for putting it where we had to put it.
So as you were saying, 200 plus kilometres of riverbank, you can't do, it was you couldn't do 200 kilometres of levees. How were you making those kind of decisions? Was it a work group? Was it talking to experts? Who even knows about this stuff, right?
Yeah, well, good question, because, a lot of the young guys that were, designing these levees had just been to university and learnt about levees. None of them had actually been in this situation of having a flood before. So it was very interesting. We had to go strategic. I mean, the first chat, the Premier came up on the day I was sworn in, and I had a chat to him and I said, if we have to pay for these levees, we're not building them. So, that was even the first road bump, is if we had to pay, there was no way I was going to take money from people from Truro, their rate money, and they're not anywhere near the river, and, place it into a levy. So we were very lucky to get government support, and the government said, no, we'll pay for them. We'll pay for them to come down. So at least we knew that was, agreed. And then, we had to look at the most strategic points. So we had a caravan park in Morgan, and it already had a road levy around it, but it needed to be built higher. So, that for that protection of asset, we really had to do it. And then, the main street of Manning, like I said, that was strategic to make sure that the rest of the town could keep their septic system going.
Yeah. There are lots of examples of people going under. So how many people, and, with the full extent of your area of concern, how many people couldn't be protected?
Look, we had around about 2,300 homes inundated, homes and businesses inundated over that period of time. And that was about 36% of the value of our council assets. So it was huge.
Wow. And what was the basic issue? Like these houses, when we say they were impacted, inundated, some, I've seen photos, the water up to the roofs of some houses, right? Did we lose a lot of places?
Yeah, I think we did. We still don't know total numbers. There's some people that haven't come forward. Some people that still haven't been to their property. There's a little part of Morgan. They all had to leave their houses in about September because the roads were going under. And all of those people had looked at the flood numbers at the time and decided, let's put all of our furniture up to the second story. So they all did that. But then the government kept redoing the numbers, at the point in time where they realised that it was actually going to hit their second story. It was too late to get in. Some of them boated in and, lifted things up on buckets or on kitchen benches upstairs and things like that. But unfortunately for those people, because the predictions were so different, right at the start to in the middle, they'd, lost everything because they thought it was going to be safe when they left their houses.
Yeah, wow. So we hear a lot of stories about challenges in the, recovery, insurance, rebuilding world. But what's been the experience that you've seen, right, supporting people? Because they would, they'd be looking to you for, some, leadership or encouragement. How has that aspect rolled out?
Yeah, there's been some real horror stories. We were able to advocate to the government, and they were supporting people that didn't have insurance, because there was a lady in the Swan Reach area who, went to reinsure at about November when the floodwaters were coming, and her insurance had gone from $3,000 to, I think it was $16,000. Now, she was on a pension. There was no way she was going to be able to cover that. So she wasn't able to renew her insurance. So it was a little bit unfair, like she'd had it all for all of the years when there'd been no floods, and then all of a sudden she wasn't able to get it. So the government did come in and help, but, very small payments, compared to the price of the house. There were some really good insurance companies, and there's some really bad insurance companies. A lot of the stories that I've heard is, there was a shop in the main street and they were able to get their insurance money. They've rebuilt. But then when they're ready to, open their business, they couldn't even get public liability insurance just because the flood had been. The other people in Manum or anywhere that had the postcode of us, which, some of them are 10, 20 kilometres from the river, all of our insurances went up. So even though we weren't, part of a flood, at the time, if you bought a new car, you were unable to even get insurance just because of that postcode. So you had to really look around to make sure you could find an insurer that would help. So yeah, there's plenty of horror stories about insurance.
Well, it's an interesting question. How, particularly with, people are noting that climate change, is potentially, we're going to see more natural events that impact us. As someone, in charge of a community, what's your concern and what are your thoughts for how we deal with this?
Look, I'm really concerned, the majority of people were covered in that last flood, but not many of them have been able to keep their insurance up because of those huge increases in their premiums. So next flood, we're going to have a lot more issues of people being uninsured. So it does concern me. Anyone that's built a new home since the flood, we were able to work with the government to get the planning laws changed so that any new builds should be built at a height where, as long as we don't get a super mega flood, they should be built at a height that they'll be safe. The water should flow down in that first story. They're only allowed to build a very small toilet type area down in the bottom story. So, we're hoping that next flood there's not as much damage, but, we won't know until it happens.
Wow. So the building codes have responded to this flood already.
Yeah, our staff were right on to that. They actually started working with the government in August. So the code changed quite quickly, thanks to the government's quick action on that. And it came in instantly, even through a consultation period, so that new builds could get started because, that main street shop, for example, they were already looking at building a new shop before the flood had hit. So that sort of got their plans, working a little bit faster.
Yeah. Wow. So if we accept that, building codes aside, it's difficult in some ways to live by the river. Like the most desirable land is down as close to the river. But, we've now, there's been the record flood in 56, floods in the 70s, 2016, now 2022. The river will flood. So, people will continue to build there. Is that just going to be, is it just going to be something people have to understand will happen or?
Yeah. And I think most people that live on the river do understand that. And, the benefits to the river flooding are also great. Like it's terrible that people lose their homes or get inundated, but what it does to the river to make a really healthy ecosystem. So I think people understand. And we just hope that they build to the standards so that, we can be more resilient to floodwaters.
The river is incredibly beautiful. It's an amazing kind of landscape to do there. Something I noticed talking to people seem to be captured by the land. They seem to be very much part of the land. They go away and come back, right? Is that, as someone who's been drawn to it, right, and taken it, what is that about? Like, is it, what's the magic that that river has on, sort of drawing people to it?
For me, it's the serenity. You can sit there, you just have beautiful sounds around you. At night time, you see the darkest sky with the most beautiful stars, and it's really hard to step away from. You're living in a place like that, and still only being, for us in Manham, an hour from Adelaide, an hour from the Barossa, an hour from the beach. You're in the middle of bliss.
Wow. And they seem to have muddy water in their veins, right? So they seem, Jim.
Yeah. Look, I've been talking to a few Indigenous people, and I really wish the river was like it was 100 years ago, when we could see to the bottom. It would have been even more beautiful then. But,
Wow.
The fact that we can enjoy it even the way it looks now, I think it says a lot.
Wow. That, what is your feeling for the river? Like it's now, there's a lot of discussion around water and, water rights and, agriculture and the future of agriculture in the area. As the mayor, where you have concerns about using the river as well as the health of the river and using the land and the health of the land, what do you feel is the way forward for that stuff?
Look, I'm a big advocate to keeping the river as healthy as possible. I would like to look for sustainable farming, so that we're not wasting water where we can be doing something else. I would also like, in Adelaide, they take a lot of water from the Murray when we have desalination plants. So, it always makes me wonder why we're not just taking more water out of the desalination plant to try and keep the river flowing and, more healthy. There's plenty of discussion to go.
Yeah. And the flood for you, what was the flood like? Because it was a long, slow build up, right? And of course you were busy putting the emergency steps in place and so on. What was it like for you personally?
Every day was different, different issues for different peoples every day. I was very open to communication. I was trying to get out into the community as much as I could. For someone that had never really done TV interviews before, I think I had 97 in the first 4 months of my career. One of them was, Christmas Eve when our levee, we had a problem on the other side of the levee, so the dry side of the levee, and so we're doing interviews about that. So it was crazy times. Every day went really, really fast. We had some wins. We saw some terrible things. We saw community working together amazingly. I was really proud. I was really proud of the council staff and how hard they worked. I think I told you the story of the CEO on New Year's Eve, rang one of the staff and they couldn't find anyone to man the levee. And, he got out there and he's not a guy that normally would run a diesel pump. He's the CEO and, he did that at midnight so that his council staff could enjoy New Year's Eve. So, there's stories like that throughout each of our communities of just people doing things that they wouldn't normally do just to try and help people.
And, people and people would talk to you about people who are directly impacted and then the entire community obviously is impacted by what's going on around them, even if the water doesn't lap at their feet. Were you excited to do that? What did you do to get ready for that kind of conversation every day?
No, I wasn't just excited. I was a little bit traumatized. I feel people's pain probably as much, if not more, than they feel it. Very empathetic. So I was really nervous in any conversation. I was really lucky for a lot of the relationships I was able to form with ministers of the government, the Premier, so that I knew that I had people that I could trust to go to when there was just something that didn't fit in a box, that, somebody was suffering and they weren't being helped. So, we got a few things through that I never even would have thought we would have got through just to help people. So it was a big learning curve for me. Someone who didn't understand politics really understands politics now.
Wow. And you were telling me you have, just quietly on the download, not that we want to encourage anyone to get you to use it, but you had, the Premier's number for an invite to call if something got desperate. that must have been drawing you. You really sense of I'm going to give him a call again, right?
Yeah. No, when he gave me his number, he said, if no one else can help you, you are more than welcome. So it was nice to have there. And I said to you that, through the flood, I didn't actually need it. There were times where I'd go different ways and we were able to get what we needed. But yeah, there was this tourism voucher scheme that was coming out, and I just was really concerned about how that was going to affect my community, being that none of our caravan parks were up and running. And so I certainly used that number that day, and he was able to talk to the treasurer and get $500,000 set aside just for mid-Murray. So, that eased the pain that I was feeling that day. So, yeah, it was certainly worthwhile developing those relationships.
So it must have been like it as you pointed out, like it's a tough gig to go out there and to help people that way and to be responsible for those big decisions. What are you proud of?
I'm proud we got through it. I'm proud we got through it, without too many people being affected in really bad ways. I'm proud of how the community stuck together. You would know most people love to hate their local council. It's the one bill you get where you probably know someone that works there and you like to, hate your rates notice. But at the time of the flood, people could see how hard our staff were working, how hard the elected members were working, and we're really grateful. So it was, one time of not many that we were having some really positive feedback. And that certainly helped us through. So, if you are involved in some sort of trauma, make sure you thank council staff. That does help get them through the days, because there's not many times, that we do get that positive feedback. It's normally that negative stuff that you hear all the time.
Yeah. From a family point of view, like your kids and stuff are running, how did they handle it's pretty, mum is up to her armpits in stuff. B, there's a fair bit of fear and concern in the community. Did that impact your kids?
Yeah, look, my daughter wouldn't come down the main street after the flood, when all the devastation had happened and we didn't have money to rectify anything. She'd decided in the school holidays I'm not going down the main street with mum, because everyone wants to stop mum and ask when we're going to get things fixed. They did many, many days where mum wasn't home to cook them a meal and they had to sort it out themselves. But they're very proud of the position and the work that I do. So they're always by my side. So I'm very lucky for a really awesome family.
Yeah. And their understanding of the world now, has that been changed as a result of what they, going through?
Yeah, look, I've got two that are over 18 now, and we had a vacant council position. I tried to talk them into it and they're like, no way, Jose. So I know that none of them will ever go into politics, whether it be council, state government or federal government. So I've turned them off of all of that, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah. That's their journey to work out. Yeah. Speaking of council, right? There's 4 councils involved, I think, in the from Renmark to Murray Bridge. What was it like trying to work with other institutions with other priorities?
Yeah, there's about 6. So there's 3 up in the Riverland. We're smack bang in the middle of Riverland, Murraylands, and then there's 2 down the Murraylands way. Of those 6, all of us, except for 1, was a new mayor. So we all came in on that same day, and we're learning, really quick about all the things that were planned and might be coming for us. So I made some really good friends, like we've got some great colleagues. It was easy to pick up the phone and say, hey, we've just gone through this. Have you got any suggestions? The 3 upriver, they were seeing everything just before, it was about to hit us. So for them to send some intelligence down to say, hey, this is what we've just been through. Don't use these sandbags, or, do this. So yeah, it was really great to have some really hardworking colleagues that were happy to share their journey with us as well.
Do you think the councils work well together?
Yeah, I think we do. We've got a really great group, but we also had councils from the city, helping us out. We had one council send sandbags up because they were really hard to get throughout the flood. And that's something probably that hit the community the most, is they all wanted hundreds of sandbags to save their houses, not understanding that sandbags are really for really quick flooding, flash flooding where it's just 1 or 2 days. They don't last sitting 3 months underwater. So, people were trying to get heaps of sandbags, whereas the SES were just saying, hey, just put them in your sinks and under your doors, and, you really need to let the water flow in and out. So that was something that, even though we knew it wasn't going to help, we needed to get those sandbags there to make people feel like they'd done what they could do to look after their homes. So having all that support from other councils down in Adelaide or even other regional councils was just amazing.
Yeah. Who was in charge?
Oh, the CEO for our council area, but they had this little Zest group, like a zone emergency group. So they were having online meetings all the time where people were sharing this intelligence. Once the flood emergency was called, the SES was the driving force. So they, made every call that needed to be made. And in a way that was good for council because we could say that, it wasn't in our control. So I think it was something that I'd asked the Premier quite early is, please take that so that we're not in that stressful situation of trying to make decisions. So that was really good for those decisions to be taken away from us. But it also meant that we could build levees without development approval and we could go get that afterwards. So once that emergency was called, we could do things a little bit quicker, as you would know, like government. There's always forms to fill and, bureaucracy to go through. So when they call that emergency, you can just get through all of that, which was really great.
Now, there are stories out there, I've had the joy of talking to people with the range of experiences, one of which the emergency services can be a little blind at times. Do you think that there's, an opportunity to improve how the emergency services did their stuff as well?
Yeah, certainly. And I think I shared this story with you. There was a farmer that was saying, hey, I think you need to break your levee here. And, the emergency services guys, again, young, and there's some really great young people out there, but they hadn't been through it. And, he had life experience and, he was saying you need to break it here so that it doesn't take your road with you. And of course, they made the decision not to break it. And 2 weeks later, the levee broke and took the whole road with it. So what that meant is that, to get to that ferry, it took 2 months more than what it should have because government had to fix the road, more expense, all that kind of stuff. So, something that I've put across in any learnings, and we have evaluated the flood, there's been an inquiry on the flood, is, hey, maybe just have a really good listen to the people on the ground because they might have seen or heard something and, they might have some good ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, some tragic sort of decisions being made that, went one way and it could have been avoided. It's one of those stories. I guess it's really important to capture those lessons, right, and listen to the people and the lived experience of this flood. I guess this is, we're talking and sharing stories in this forum, but is there another forum? Are you, are we locking in those learnings?
Yeah, so the state government did call it inquiry on that flood. So a lot of people have, presented to that inquiry. So there will certainly be some good learnings from that.
I was speaking to some guy and he was talking about the lockmasters knowing that the numbers, the predictions weren't right, that they were going to be, that they were saying it was going to be higher. It's a fascinating idea, the old folk, the people who had seen 56 and also people who knew the river from multi-generations, and of course Indigenous knowledge, that they seem to have, a whole different awareness.
Yeah. And, it was really unpredictable in Manum where you saw, we'd built levees so water couldn't come this way. Our normal river, I think, is about 300 metres wide. Well, one of the levees broke across the river and it ended up being 1.3 kilometres wide. So what you were seeing upstream, really high water, you weren't getting that in Manum because obviously it went wider rather than higher. So, yeah, it's all that unpredictability, and because water was flowing different ways than they'd expected because of, different things, and probably the drought over the years has also, changed the way that water flows. So I don't know that even that the next flood will go the same way, or that we'll be able to predict it clearly, but we can obviously put more things in place so that we can get closer.
I love an image was described of, like once the levee's up and it's holding, right, of course it's maintenance. And even in Manham, even the main road, I think it was your director was talking about putting a hole in the bitumen, and it was, the water had come up and was operating like a fountain. So,
yep, our roads were bubbling. So we had to stop traffic, and that the whole idea of having that levee was so that people could still get through to the other side of Manham, but we did have to stop traffic because we weren't sure on loads. But also on the good side of the levee where it was meant to be dry, the cellar of the pub and the hardware store was filling up with water, and they were pumping that out onto the road, which obviously had the stormwater drains blocked so that the water didn't get into the dry end. So yeah, we had some issues, but we worked through them.
yeah, the man-made Lake Manham there. So yeah,
Yes, yeah, and no one even talks about this, but we had huge rainwater tanks around Manham, and people probably didn't know, but they were actually filled with septic. Sort of doing the overload until the trucks could come. So trucks were coming down our main street every 2 hours, pumping out the septic to make sure that we didn't overflow. So yeah, it was a really shitty situation.
And so you've got through, and of course that maintenance every day. So you're like, it's a long period. Of course, it was 9 months lead in, and then the peak was in January, and then the water slowly went down, and then you've got cleanup. How so? What was it? 12 months all up? Really, it was a 12-month flood.
Oh yeah, look, the water was there for about 3 months, but we're still recovering 2 years later. A lot of it to do with not having funding to do things, which we'll still work on and advocate for. But yeah, it was long, and yeah, I don't think any of us were prepared for how long it was going to be and how traumatic that makes it, because it's not just over tomorrow and you can have a debrief and then get on with it. Like I said, some people still haven't gone and seen their blocks of land, or you drive past the old shop in the main street that's not there anymore, and you feel for the 85-year-old that lived in the back of it, and he's now living in a caravan or a shed. It's still heartbreaking every day.
What are the images that stay with you? What, like, visually it's an extraordinary landscape. And then with the flood there, it's like you described, 1.4 kilometre wide expanse of water and so on. What images stay with you?
There's this one image, and I think about it a lot when I think about the flood. I went to a town called Blanchetown. Now, Blanchetown, they love their community. It was probably one of the worst affected areas that we had in Mid-Murray. It went pretty high. And the day I went up there was for a community meeting, and they'd just opened the roads up. So I decided, well, I need to go and have a look at the devastation. And the people were walking down the street just with zombie-like faces, like the mouths were open. They were just looking around. The trees were sort of dead up to a point where the water went, and then a little bit green above that. The ground was all open and muddy, and it'd almost look like a bushfire had bricked through, and like there's brown on the ground and the trees dead to here. And yeah, but it was the people's faces, the devastation. They were going to see their homes or their holiday homes, and some people have had those holiday homes in their family for generations, and they'd normally spend Christmas there, and they weren't able to spend Christmas there. And it was about end of February or early March as the water was subsiding. And yeah, that's something that I just couldn't get out of my head. And a lot of my advocacy efforts went back to that point and those spaces. And I thought, they're the people that we're fighting for. That's, what we're doing this for.
Wow. Powerful. Going through Blanchetown now, you can see, there's some, rebuilding going on, and yet there are also places that are not touched. Yeah. So, is there a percentage of people who won't come back, do you think?
I don't know. I think some of the ones in Blanchetown that haven't been touched is because no one had been there for so long. So it's even about council learning who actually owns that and are they still around. Yeah, a lot of the other ones are just waiting for their knockdown. So, they'll happen in time. So I think, Blanchetown, like I said, those people love Blanchetown. So I think it will get back to how it was. And, they're very resilient people. So I can't wait for that to go back to how it was.
Yeah. It's as you said, people have come back and grown up, right? They're multi-generations, have holidayed or have, spent time. And that's really been the building of the Riverland, the visiting and the tourists and so on. How do you encourage people to come back? Because initially, right, they would be coming back to something that wasn't the same. It wasn't, as nice, or it might have been changed or things. So how do we, encourage people to do that?
Look, I think, most people that have lived in the area or have those holiday homes in the area, they just do it because that's how it's always been. But I do know that the very first Christmas after the flood, 8 or 9 months after the water had subsided, was quite hard on some people, especially the ones that had to have their knockdowns. I think this Christmas wasn't so bad, but the memories will still be there. I think as we rebuild more and more, it'll be better. Getting the tourists back, it's just about advertising and letting them know what we love about the river, and we have had a lot of support from the Tourism Commission and the government to do that. But like I said, once you come and, be in that area for a little bit, you just want to be there. So
it's an amazing place. So the future for the Riverland and the Murraylands, what do you feel is going to happen going forward?
Look, we will continue to work together. We'll continue to advocate together. We'll, try and keep everything safe and flood resilient. I think I talked to you about one of our biggest issues at the time of the flood is that there's a bridge at Blanchetown, there's a bridge at Murray Bridge, but there's literally an hour and a half to drive between those two bridges. So people on the other side of the river that might have only been 5 minutes from Mannum via a ferry ride were suddenly an hour and 10 minutes from Mannum, and they had to go all the way around. So kids were leaving an hour before they would ever have to leave before. So a lot of the stuff we talk about is trying to make we know that there's going to be another flood one day. So it's about making us more resilient. So what are we going to do next time so that the kids don't have to get up an hour earlier? Can we raise those roads? Because that was a lot of the time. The problem is that the road wasn't high enough to keep that ferry running. We had a ferry in Cadell, which the government was going to stop about 10 or 12 years ago, and the community fought really hard knowing that it was one of the highest river crossings. So, trying to get some of that resilience into our infrastructure or into government infrastructure so that it's not it doesn't hurt so much next time, I guess.
Yeah. Do you think technology can help?
Yeah, there was a time where the REA had contacted me and they were talking about drones to get medication across the other way. So, yeah, certainly will help. And, as time goes on, maybe we can get some better phone towers and internet. Like even today, I'm going on and off and I'm only two kilometres from the main street of Mannum, so that, we can use that next flood. So we'll continue to advocate for that.
About flood-based technology, I understand they were using some, levee technology, right? We used artificial walls. That was exciting from my point of view. Did that help?
Yeah, the bags that they used in the main street were pretty amazing. Like those went up within a week. It was really quick. Whereas we did the earthen levee in our reserve, and that took, a good month. We had to start that straight away. We had to dig down, which ruined all of our sprinkler systems and things like that because we had to do it so quick. Whereas this, levee made out of these bags that the army were using, at the time it was like, really, is this going to work? But after seeing it, we think we would definitely use that again. It worked really well. It was easy to put up and take down. It didn't leave, a huge mess like the earthen levee did. So, the technology has been great. And although we didn't really want to be the testers of that technology, they did tell us, we have a lot of faith in this. We've used it in wartime and things like that. So, now knowing that, we won't be so uncertain and we'll just go ahead and do it next time. Yeah.
And it might be necessary to explore even more technology, right? Because it's a huge job to build a giant wall every time the water comes up.
Yes, yeah. I'd really am looking forward to the inquiry, the outcome of that inquiry. I'd really love for government to help support in those situations, because it was a lot of work for our staff to do, as well as their normal everyday business. There were towns that weren't anywhere near the floodwaters that probably weren't touched, for 6 months to 12 months, because we were trying to do all this flood recovery and, prior to that, getting prepared for the flood. So yeah, it would be nice to get some support from other agencies. So we've fed back, and we hope that's listened to.
That's magic. What did you do to get, as you said, you bore a lot of that sort of empathic weight of going through something very traumatic for the community. How did you look after yourself after the flood?
I have a lot of support systems. I've always had mental health issues, so I do know when to seek help. So I had some counselling throughout the flood. I do remember calling one of my elected members on Christmas Eve just to check how he was. He had to be moved out of his home about a month earlier, and he was living on a caravan about 1 kilometre from his home. And that day, there was just something in his voice, and I was very, very concerned. And, he talked about a lot of his friends that just were struggling. The water, hadn't hit at the top level at that time. And I got off the phone and I thought, what am I going to do? The staff are so busy, I can't bother them. And ended up, we've got this great group called Caring Connected Communities. At the time, they were called Mid-Murray Suicide Prevention Network. But what we found is if we use the Suicide Prevention Network, people wouldn't come to our community connection event. So I sent an email around Christmas Eve, and I said to these guys, this community is really suffering, and I'm just wondering if we can help them in any way. And within, I think it was about 4 days, I think the 27th of December, we got in a council van. I picked them all up on the way. It was about an hour and a half travel, and we ended up in Morgan and Blanchetown. We stopped off at both, and we did these coffee and chats. And it was just great that people, even though I couldn't help them from a council side of things, at least we could listen and then let them know, hey, we can advocate for that. So it was about trying to find out what biggest worries were. And at the time, a lot of people's worries were not knowing when the electricity was going to be cut off, or not knowing about what their insurance covered. So at least we could sort of get some support in that way, not knowing how it would happen after the flood and things like that. So it was just listening. Yeah, so it was a really great event, and they ended up coming back, I think, about 3 weeks later, and we ended up with a lunch and chat. So the RSL at Morgan put on a free lunch, and we just had these conversations. So what I did find is these community connection events worked, and I'm really proud that from that, the government saw that and was able to give funding to many communities over the flood, and continue to keep doing that to make sure that people are getting out and talking. Because, one lady in Blanchetown said to me, I felt like I was the only one going through it. Of course, I knew that everyone else was going through it, but until I sat down and talked and somebody else said, yeah, that's exactly how I'm feeling. She went, oh, okay, so that's normal then, So, yeah, and that's what I've learnt throughout this is, when you've got this worry, there's no point just thinking about it over and over and over again. Just spit it out, tell someone about it, because they might go, oh, yeah, well, I feel the same way. Or you can put your heads together. When somebody is not as stressed, they can be more solution focused than you can. So, yeah, big learning for me, and we'll always be sharing this, is just talk. Like the Are You OK Day is the best day in the world, and you should ask your friends every day, are they okay, so that we can get out our worries and make it normalize talking.
Beautiful. Important to say. Well done. What do you think community has learnt from this? How do you feel about what the community's going forward with?
I think the community has learnt that if the government says there's going to be a flood, we probably should listen right at the start and, start preparing early. Like I said, a lot of us didn't believe it. So, they weren't getting their sandbags to the end. That's another thing, people were building these sandbag walls and they just weren't worthwhile. So they put so much time, effort, money. Some people even got earth movers in to, build their own levees. So I think we've worked out that none of that works for these long floods unless you've got this quality engineered levee, So be prepared, get the stuff out from the bottom levels, or, you know, if it's going to be top, get that out too, build higher, all those sorts of things. Yeah, that's, I guess, a lot of learnings that I've heard from community.
Yeah, wow. Wow. And what about the mindset? Do you think the community likes each other? You know, has there been something happen as a result of facing something together?
Yeah, the community connection seems to be a lot better than it was before. Definitely the resilience. You know, my community's amazingly resilient, and I often say, you know, I wish we didn't always have to be so resilient. I wish that the people down in Adelaide would understand us without us being resilient and send help. So we all know that we can rely on each other. I guess people in our community know, hey, let's share it with the council, even though they might not be able to help. They might be able to come up with a solution or advocate for us. So, yeah, there's been lots.
Well, you know, it's a pretty tough place to love. You know, it's hot. You know, it's a struggle on the land. It's a struggle on the river. So you guys have really need to be resilient, but you know, you seem to be doing that beautifully. Yeah. So, what do you personally want for your future, right, when you look forward? You know, you've had this tough couple of years in office. Are you going to be a 20-year mayor? Are you going to be are you going to go and, go to high office? What's Simone's plans, right, looking forward?
Good question. I don't like to plan too far ahead. So my term ends in November 2026, and I'll probably make my mind up about a month before November 2026. I am very proud of how far we've come, and, you know, a little piece of me will be concerned about leaving that to someone else, and, you know, whether that, you know, keeps up the good work we've been doing. I certainly don't want to go into politics. I don't like politics. I don't like that areas that need funding or support don't get it just because they don't have enough people or they don't vote for the right colour. I'm really hoping that we change that, and I have seen a lot of change over my time as mayor. I really do hope that our communities keep telling their stories, because that's one big lesson for me, is that maybe people weren't helping us because we weren't telling the story. We weren't telling them how we were feeling and what we were needing. So, you know, big lessons for me. Yeah, I don't know. A little part of me just wants to be a foster mum and cuddle babies all day and have no stress. But yeah, we'll just, I'm a big believer in the universe. It always sends me where I need to be. So.
Well, I think it sent you where Manum and Mid Murray needed you as well. So great job. Thank you so much for sharing your story around the flood, and of course around your community. Right, you've been a wonderful servant and a wonderful advocate for it. All the best going forward, and I'm sure, right, by 26, right, they'll all demand you to take another term. Right?
We'll see what happens, though. Thank you for having me, and thanks for what you're doing. I hope that somebody can take something from this and, you know, get through a traumatizing situation easier than what they would have beforehand.
It's been wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Simone Bailey, Mayor of Mid Murray. It's been wonderful. Kintsugi Heroes, thanks you.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Riverland Recovery Stories. If anything in this conversation has had a triggering effect, please seek support and reach out to someone who can help keep you safe. If you found this conversation interesting or helpful, please share it with your friends, family, and colleagues so we can help more people with their recovery from natural disasters. To find out more about Kintsugi Heroes and our other projects, head to kintsugiheroes.com.au. Thank you to our production team, Kintsugi Heroes volunteers, and most importantly, the Riverland community for sharing their lived experience.